Could somebody please make it make sense?
Hey everybody, welcome to A Pop of Culture. I'm your host, the Esoteric and Facetious, and this is A Pop of Culture, which is my video essay podcast where I speak on pop culture, social justice, and the human experience from a black, bisexual, millennial perspective. Everything, and I mean everything I say, should be taken with a grain of salt, as I'm simply a recent college grad with access to a recording device and the internet. With that being said, my youth should not be your sole reason to critique my views unless it's truly relevant. If you disagree with anything I say, let's have a civil conversation in the comment section below. Before we get into the topic of this video, I want to advertise my cover channel, A Pop of Culture Sings, where I sing throwback R&B, contemporary R&B, pop music, whatever I'm feeling, whatever you're feeling. So if you want to be down like Brandy, if you're down with the click RP Aaliyah, then definitely feel free to check that channel out. Now let's get into the topic of this video, which is Blaque Twitter and masculinity tweets. Every few months on Blaque Twitter, like clockwork, a black gay masculinity tweet goes viral. It usually says something along the lines of, why is it so hard to find other masculine gay men? Do masculine gay men looking for serious relationships exist? If y'all know any single masculine gay men, hit me up. I'm convinced I'm the only single masculine gay man in my area. Every day in America, there are single masculine black gay men who have to cope with being single because they don't want to date men who aren't masculine. Call 1-800-MASCULINE to support a single masculine black gay man today. Save a gay today. And like clockwork, we have yet another one conversation about masculinity, black queer men, masculine preferences within black queer men, within dating. Like we haven't had this conversation every other month or every month on Twitter. I wanted to make this video to give my thoughts on this phenomenon. Okay, before we get into my thoughts on black masculinity tweets, I want to talk about my experience with masculinity as a black queer man. I'm probably going to make more videos on this topic since it's a topic I feel passionate about, but I can give y'all the abridged version here. As I said in my intro, I'm a black bi man, and part of my coming out process, or coming out to myself process, came from accepting not only my attractions, but also my nature or my interest or like how I am. My inclinations. For me as a black man and just as a man in general, I'm somebody who loves pop artists. I love female pop music. I love Kelly Clarkson, Christina Aguilera, Mariah Carey, Destiny's Child. And so for me, accepting who I was as a queer man didn't just come from accepting my attractions. It was also about accepting that I didn't always fit the role of being how a black man should be. I wasn't this hyper-masculine black man who was into the sports and cars. And part of me accepting my identity was making peace with that and owning that and realizing I don't have to have certain interests or behave in a certain type of way to be valid as a man or be valid as a queer man. I, as a black queer man who is into some things that some people may consider feminine, as someone who watches Drag Race and who listens to a lot of female pop artists, I learned to love and accept myself, one, through my own self-love and self-acceptance, but also through watching content creators like the very messy 𝑭𝒐𝒐 and also people like Trini Trent. 𝑭𝒐𝒐 is a very feminine, flamboyant black gay man who has created content online for years. One of the messages of a lot of 𝑭𝒐𝒐's earlier content was that you are not any less because you are queer. You are not any less because you are feminine. You can love yourself, you can be yourself, you can live in your truth and it not be an issue. And that meant a lot to me as this young black queer man who was coming into my own and trying to learn to accept myself and to be myself. It was beautiful to see somebody living in their truth and owning who they were and not feeling shame and not making themselves smaller or trying to fit in or conform. I loved seeing him reference people like Destiny's Child, Mariah Carey, and Whitney Houston because he wasn't hiding the fact that he loved these artists. He wasn't hiding the fact that he was colorful and artistic and creative in the way that I feel a lot of black queer men feel they should. He was going to be himself regardless. If you haven't seen my 𝑭𝒐𝒐 videos, he has changed a lot, or he's just revealed a lot of his true character to his audience. So I no longer support him, but one of my favorite videos from him from the past was the Walmart Terrorist. I showed some clips of it earlier. In the story time, 𝑭𝒂𝒕 talks about a time where he was walking through Walmart with his mother. They were doing basic shopping, just minding their business, and how a bunch of people said a lot of homophobic things to him. They were following him. They're making their shopping experience difficult. And 𝑭𝒂𝒕 basically turns around and does this very dramatic rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow and basically tells them, why can't I just exist as the person I am, be me, and not be bothered by people like you? This is one of my favorite videos because I think it just encapsulates how queer people, especially more flamboyant queer people, can be minding their business, doing nothing except just being themselves, and people will accost them, they will make things more difficult for them. And I love seeing 𝑭𝒐𝒧𝒧📂 stand up for himself and basically say, you're not just going to keep talking about me, making me uncomfortable, I'm going to put you in order. And that he did. Trinity Trent is a content creator who is from Trinidad and Tobago, and he created content on Trinity Trent TV, his YouTube channel. He still uploads to his channel every now and then. He has just went on hiatus a few times and privated a lot of his content. Trinity Trent, he made a lot of content about Black pop culture, different pop culture acts he likes, the history of pop music, the history of R&B music, and also videos on homophobia, effeminaphobia, different issues in the Black community, different issues within the Black LGBT community. And he also had his podcast with 𝘎𝑪𝒐𝒍𝒍𝒐𝒘 who is an out Black queer man who created 𝘎𝒨 TV with his ex-husband Sean. He also created Love at First Night, which was a Black gay web series. And in the podcast, Trinity Trent and 𝘎𝑪𝒐𝒍𝒐𝒘 talk about homophobia, they talk about social issues, they talk about Trent's experience being somebody from Trinidad and Tobago and moving to New York to go to NYU for grad school. One of the things I loved about Trinity Trent was how open he was, how transparent he was about his trauma from being bullied by other men, by other people within his culture for being more feminine, for expressing himself the way he did. And one of the things I give credit for Trinity Trent is the fact that he put a name to a lot of these terms. 𝑭𝒐𝒧💧 would give story times about homophobia and effeminaphobia, but I don't think he put the words and the language to it that Trinity Trent did. One of my favorite forms of content from Trinity Trent was his episode School Days Were the Worst Days, which was an episode of Trinity Trent Radio where he speaks about his experiences with homophobia and effeminaphobia while he was a schoolboy in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the most important things I feel about Trinity Trent's content was the fact that he was so vocal about how effeminaphobia and homophobia are reinforced by adults. He speaks about how teachers would say homophobic things and how they would try to encourage the boys to beat and bully the people who did not conform to the masculinity standards. I think this story was very important because in the Black community, we can try to make homophobic people into these solo people who act out of their own hatred that just comes out of nowhere. But the reality is, a lot of people who perpetuate homophobia and effeminaphobia have been taught this by older people who they trust. Not all, but a lot of people have been taught this. And that shows us that adults need to speak out against homophobia and effeminaphobia, or they themselves can be complicit in the cycle of trauma for Black queer men and Black feminine men who don't fit the norm, being alienated and ostracized for not acting in the way they quote-unquote should. I also wanted to give Trinity Trent credit for going into different terms like hypermasculinity and male posturing, and also terms like effeminaphobia. Because while I appreciated the story times on homophobia from people like 𝑭𝒂𝒕𝒄𝒉, having the language of things like effeminaphobia, being able to put a word to things other than just homophobia, I feel helped a lot, because it wasn't necessarily just people who were gay or who identified as gay who were being treated in a certain way. It was people who didn't fit this norm of masculinity that was expected of them. Because someone could be gay but still on some levels fit the expectation of masculinity, generally speaking, while walking down the street. Whereas somebody could be straight but dress in a more flamboyant or artsy manner and not fit that expectation of masculinity and face social consequences because of that. I'm also grateful for him bringing clarity to the conversation on male posturing, because the problem of masculinity conversations is it's not just about some people are more traditionally masculine than other people. It's also about the fact that some people posture masculinity. They put on this front of who they think they should be, while also judging people who don't choose to put on this front. So it's not just about how I am versus how you naturally are. It's about how I am versus the image that you're putting out into the world of who you are versus who you are. It's a lot more complex than how we may initially see it. Not only watching story times about traumatic experiences that these Black men faced, but also seeing them rise above that trauma and cope with that trauma and still move forward and still have those interests. The sad truth about it is there's a lot of Black queer men who used to live for a Janet or used to live for a Beyonce, but keeping it real, homophobic and traumatic experiences had that shit beat out of them or shamed out of them where they don't feel comfortable expressing themselves. So seeing people like 𝑭𝒐𝒐 and Trinity Trent express that trauma, that very unique trauma that Black queer men experience, but rise above that trauma and still exist and own who they were, still be bold and be themselves, that was so empowering for me at a young age. I also wanted to praise Trinity Trent and 𝑭𝒐𝒐 for being very vocal about some of the not so good parts of their experiences being Black and queer. I definitely think people can undersell the pain and trauma they've went through as Black women or Black feminine men in order to push this It Gets Better narrative. And while I do believe it can get better, I do think people need to be real about the stuff they've went through, because otherwise it makes people who've been through similar stuff feel like they're the odd ones out or no one else has experienced that stuff. So when I hear these stories where 𝑭𝒐𝒐 talks about how he had to learn how to fight, when I hear these stories from Trinity Trent about how things got physically violent, I value that because they're not holding back to try to give this picture perfect narrative of what these situations can be like, because they're oftentimes not pretty. Watching content like this helped me to realize, as a Black queer man, you are valid if you are somebody who listens to the Mariah Careys or the Whitney Houstons or the Aaliyahs or the Brandys. You are not less of a man, you are not less valid because you don't fit these stereotypes or because you like this type of music or talk or behave in a certain manner. Seeing other Black queer men, seeing Black feminine men own who they were, own their interests, and not change because of society, it meant a lot to me, especially when I was in the Black church where they were trying to police people's behavior and shame people's behavior. When I was in the Black community, and when I was also in a Black family where certain behaviors are praised and certain behaviors are shamed. And let's not forget Drag Race. For me, watching Drag Race was so affirming because I was seeing these Black queer men and just queer men in general and queer people in general owning their femininity. And it was just so empowering because a lot of assigned male at birth queer people are shamed for their femininity. They're told they shouldn't express themselves in this way to rid themselves of it or rid themselves of this earth. It was incredibly empowering to see these queer people. A lot of them were shamed for being feminine. They were shamed for their femininity. To see them on a show where they could actually apply their skills and talents, where they could gain fame or their talents that they otherwise would be shamed for and chastised for, it was so empowering. Watching content creators like Trinity Trent and 𝑭𝒐𝒐 Howard, who showed me that you could exist outside of the trauma and the shame of being Black and feminine and Black and feminine and queer. Watching shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, and even honestly a lot of those empowerment anthems from people like Christina, Beautiful, even though I kind of do want to unpack that trope, like the affirming anthem for the marginalized groups by the privileged and often white and cis and heterosexual white women. I've actually made a little parody of Beautiful that kind of encapsulates how I feel about these tracks. I'm a rich, licensed woman telling you you're beautiful. I'm a rich, licensed woman telling you you're beautiful. Make this song platinum today. Songs like that portrayed that LGBT people could exist as the people they were meant a lot to me as a young person. Songs like that, alongside that affirming media and those affirming content creators, they showed me that I had a place on this earth. When sermons and church leaders and family members had a lot of negative things to say about the LGBT community, watching these content creators showed me, one, there's nothing wrong with who I am, and two, I can have a future existing in this world as a person who has these traits and attributes. I also wanted to shout out documentaries like Tongues Untied and Paris is Burning as inspirations for me as a Black queer man. One of the reasons why I love these documentaries is they show that Black queer people and queer people of color, queer and trans people of color, have been existing for years, embracing themselves, existing as they are in ways that may not align with the hypermasculine standard for Black men. Oftentimes in Black churches, in the Black home, in Black communities, because a Black queer man acts different, it is implied that what he's doing is wrong. I remember watching X Factor USA with my family when I was in middle school, and one of the people auditioning, he was wearing a dress, He was wearing a wedding dress and singing Born This Way. I remember my father saying, well, there's something wrong with him. There is something wrong with him because he was doing something that's different. There is this idea that because some feminine Black queer men express themselves in these flamboyant ways, that there's something wrong with them. But when I watch documentaries like Paris is Burning and Tongues Untied, I see that Black queer men have existed for decades, for centuries, doing them and being them. Just because my father didn't understand or didn't like the fact that they were Black queer men dressing in different ways or singing songs like Bootylicious or Born This Way doesn't mean that those Black queer men were doing something wrong. Just because they don't act like he acts doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. And I find in Black spaces phrases like, why is he acting like that? What is wrong with him? Why is he talking like that? Why is he moving like that? These are all code words for why is he acting feminine? Why is he acting in a way that I don't approve of? The sad thing that I find is a lot of times in one school or in one church, there will be one very clockable person who's more flamboyant and feminine than the other people. And while there's nothing wrong with the way they're behaving, because they are the one more flamboyant, more out person, they'll often be chastised for their behavior using the logic of other Black men don't act in this way and you're acting this way, so there's something wrong with you. The reality is there are other people who act like this person and how they're acting is not wrong. It's just this community and this environment isn't accepting of that behavior. But if Black queer men watch documentaries like Paris is Burning, if they watch documentaries like Tongues Untied, they see, wait a minute, there's whole communities of people who act differently, who express themselves and embrace themselves. Just because this little crop of people that I've been forced to be around because of my circumstances isn't cool with this stuff doesn't mean that that stuff is wrong. It just means that I need to be secure in myself and find my tribe. So that, to put it short, is part of my journey in self-acceptance as a Black queer man, especially a Black queer man who can lean on the feminine side at times. So entering this conversation about Black queer men and masculinity, I feel I enter the conversation at a very interesting place because so much of my coming out to myself and coming out process was in accepting the fact that I wasn't this perfect hyper-masculine Black man and owning that. So when I came to truth with being queer, with being bi, part of coming to that truth was accepting the fact and owning and loving the fact that I'm not this hyper-masculine man all the time. Now, I do feel like there are masculine aspects or traits about me, but I own the fact that I was someone who lives for a Mariah Carey or an Ariana Grande or a Drag Race, because owning that and accepting that about myself meant I wasn't going to allow people to shame me for having those interests or expressing myself in that way. But because so much of my journey accepting my queerness came from accepting feminine aspects of me or feminine interest, when I see all these tweets about Black queer men and masculinity and masculine preferences, it's very weird for me because when it comes to my attractions to other queer men or Black queer men, a lot of the queer men I find myself connecting to are Black queer men who have similar experiences to me and similar expressions to me. Some Black queer men are disgusted at the idea of being around a Black queer man who likes female artists or Drag Race. I'm like, let's talk about Janet, let's talk about Brandy. Now, of course, for me, I'm somebody where I feel like interest and personality compatibility are different. Like, you could like the same things as somebody but not have a compatible personality. So I could be with someone who is into different things, but we have a compatible personality and like each other's company. But for me, when it comes to generally thinking about interest in other queer men or Black queer men, I'm oftentimes seeking somebody who has a similar experience of owning their identity, owning their femininity, owning different aspects of who they are, being at peace with that. I find that attractive that someone exists as somebody who isn't ashamed of who they are. I like the idea of being around other people who have those similar experiences to me because I know what that's like and I connect to that. Part of learning to accept who I was came from understanding hypermasculinity and unpacking masculinity as a Black queer man. I am somebody who, even though I have feminine aspects to me, I still identify as a man and want to be seen as a man and have masculine aspects of me. One of the things I've learned is there's nothing wrong with wanting to be perceived as masculine, but the issue is when people try to posture masculinity. From the time I was a teenager, I was very aware of the fact that there is an expectation of masculinity from Black men. While masculinity is definitely on a spectrum, and there are different things that can be perceived as masculine, there is definitely a very narrow definition of what masculinity is within the context of Black men. And if you present that certain level of masculinity, you are treated a certain way. And if you don't present that certain level of masculinity, you are treated differently and are often shamed because of that. I understood that a lot of Black men feel the need to posture masculinity. They feel the need to prove they're masculine by sleeping with a lot of women and talking about sleeping with these women, or doing certain activities, or just acting extra hard. From a young age, I understood that, but because I was at peace with who I was and because I loved who I was, I didn't feel this need to posture this certain level of masculinity. So when I entered these Black queer spaces and I heard all this about masculinity, it was definitely weird for me, because I understood as a Black man I was valid no matter how I presented. I was valid no matter what my attractions were, what my interests were. I was always still going to be a man because I identify as a man. And I understood I don't have to fit a narrow definition of masculinity to be valid. And that's something I kind of want to get into. For me, one of the reasons why I'm not that attracted to hypermasculinity is because I often feel like hypermasculinity is a put on. One of the reasons why I'm more attracted to queer men who are at least on some part openly feminine is because it comes off as organic to me. When I meet a Black queer man who is a soft boy, who presents as a man, identifies as a man, who is open about being interested in an Ariana Grande or a Drag Race or something, that shows me that person's at peace with who they are. They're at peace with their femininity. They're at peace with their identity. But when I see a hyper-masculine queer man, sometimes some people are just more masculine. Like, that's just how they are, how they walk, how they talk. But I also feel like the problem of hyper-masculinity is sometimes it is a front. And sometimes those people who you see who are acting hyper-masculine, whether they're straight or whether they're queer, they're trying to prove something to somebody. And I'm not saying there aren't people who are hyper-feminine who are also putting on a front and trying to give off this certain image of something that they may not fully be. But when I see hyper-masculinity, I often tie it to posturing and male posturing and proving that you are a real man and that you are not soft and you're not weak. Especially when it comes to queer men, I feel I often tie queer men who are being hyper-masculine to people who want to be distanced from queerness and how queer men are perceived. I will say there is a difference though. There are some queer men who are 100% out and comfortable in who they are, and they just aren't feminine in the ways that they don't do certain things because they don't naturally interest them. And they just do things that naturally interest them that just happen to be masculine. Like, you can meet somebody who's completely out and completely confident in who they are, but they just like sports. And it's not that they like sports because they want to prove that they're tough or hard. They may like working out and working out to look a certain type of way, but that's not them trying to prove they are masculine or that they're a real man or that they're not soft. So I'm not against masculine presenting men or hyper-masculine men, but there are also a lot of men who try to conform to the standard of masculinity to prove their masculinity, to separate themselves from other queer men. So for me, that's why I feel I often tend to lean towards more, I guess, feminine of center men, meaning not all the way to the extreme, but more at peace with that. And let's kind of go there, like, let's talk about this. I feel like when I see hyper-masculine men or overtly masculine presenting men, I often tie them to DL culture or discrete culture, which is queer men who want to interact with other queer men, but on the low. They may only want to have adult interactions with queer men, but they may not actually want to date and settle down with other queer men. And there are plenty of masculine presenting queer men who are serious about wanting to be in a relationship with other men. I'm not opposed to the idea of dating someone who's more traditionally masculine, but being very real, as someone who does listen to female artists and as someone who does watch shows like Drag Race, I feel less comfortable pursuing queer men who present more masculine because of the tweets that I'm going to get to, because there's a minority of Black queer men who are hyper-masculine who continually express disgust at queer men who express any form of femininity. So I feel like even though I could probably meet some great, more masculine presenting queer men who could be great partners to me, I feel like sometimes I only consider more feminine presenting queer men because I don't even feel like those queer men who are more hyper masculine would give me the time of day. For me, I'm the type of person who wants to be comfortable in a relationship, and I don't want somebody sucking their teeth if I say I'm about to watch Drag Race. I don't want someone judging me because I am excited that Christina dropped a new album. And so I'm not gonna lie, when it comes to interacting with more masculine or hyper masculine presenting queer men, I'm not opposed to it, but I also feel more safe being around queer men who are more outwardly feminine, because then we can watch Drag Race together because I already know they're cool with that type of stuff, rather than me trying to have to figure out, oh, is this person cool with this? Are they not cool with it? Because that's the thing I've noticed with a lot of more masculine presenting queer men. Some masculine presenting queer men, they claim they want a masculine man, but I feel like, I'm not going to say that they don't want a masculine man, but I feel like a lot of masculine presenting queer men who complain about dating Black queer men, I feel like it's not necessarily about having a masculine partner. I feel like it's more about having a partner who you can present to the world who doesn't make you look gay. And some of you may be like, well, if a man is presenting another man as his partner, it's gay no matter what, no matter how masculine or feminine it is. But I definitely feel like there are levels to queerness and queer relationships. One thing I wanted to clarify here is some Black queer men with a quote-unquote masculinity preference will date Black queer men who don't fit that masculinity preference, or who don't fully fit that masculinity preference. What do I mean by this? So I may claim I want to date other masculine men, that's who I want to date, etc., etc. But the reality is, if they meet someone who they're visually attracted to enough, a lot of times they're still going to pursue that person. But the problem is, sometimes these Black queer men, they'll try to police the masculinity of that person. It's like, I'll date you because I am attracted to you, but at the same time, I'm going to make an issue if you try to do too many things that make me uncomfortable. And this can create toxic relationships because you got with someone with knowledge of who they are and their inclinations and interests, but now you're making their nature and inclinations an issue, even though you knew those going in. One example of the femme shaming is 𝑾𝒂𝒕𝒄𝒉. 𝑾𝒂𝒕𝒄𝒉 is someone who competed on RuPaul's Drag Race. I believe it was season 13. And she talked about how her boyfriend was uncomfortable with her doing drag, so she would still do drag, but she just would either keep it a secret or keep it on the low or not do it around him. And that's an example of how queer men will date other queer men who are more feminine, but they'll police things or share that they're not comfortable with certain behaviors, and how that can cause conflict. Because if you're a whole drag queen who's doing Drag Race, which costs money, it's a huge deal, it's a huge opportunity, how can you be with someone who's not supportive of that? But it's also like, I don't blame 𝑾𝒂𝒕𝒄𝒉 because of the constraints going on with her. Dating isn't easy, especially in the LGBT community, so I'm not going to shame her for being with someone who may not all the way be there for her. For me personally, I'm not opposed to dating a more masculine presenting Black queer men, but because of all the anti-feminine sentiment from a small minority of Black queer men, I don't necessarily feel that empowered to pursue more masculine presenting Black queer men, which is kind of sad, but it's true. I think as I get older and actually am around more queer people and enter more queer spaces, I do want to move to a more queer for me area where there is a community and a scene and a dating pool, a bigger dating pool. I feel like as I have more of those experiences in real life with other people in the community, I'll have more experiences to speak to where I can say, oh, like this isn't as big a deal. But as someone who more so interacts with the LGBT community on social media rather than in real life because of personal constraints and access, I do feel like those hypermasculinity tweets from those Black queer men impact how I move in the dating life. And I'm still open, and if I find someone attractive, I'll like them on Tinder or whatever app I'm using, and if we match, we'll talk, and I'm not going to be afraid to interact with someone because they present as more masculine. But it is something I think about. So now that we talked about masculinity, Black queer men, and my journey with masculinity as a Black queer man, I want to finally talk about the tweets. How do I feel about the tweets? So as I read earlier, there are all these tweets that these Black queer men make complaining about being single and not finding other single masculine Black queer men. How do I feel about these tweets? Here's my thing about the whole masculinity preference thing. I personally do not care if someone has a preference towards masculine men or if they don't want to date feminine men, and I'll tell you why I don't care. As I said earlier, I'm a Black queer man, I'm a Black bi man, I'm somebody who is a Black bi man who isn't the most hyper-masculine. It's not to say I'm not masculine, but I'm not the most hyper-masculine person walking the streets. On some level, as someone who does want to pursue long-term relationships in marriage and kids, I have to understand that not everybody is going to be interested in me. That doesn't mean woe is me. Do I think there are some Black queer men who are not attracted to other Black queer men because they are ashamed of how society links femininity to queerness and how society links femininity to people being less of a man? Do I think some people allow outside influence to impact who they're open to openly date? Do I think some Black queer men who are extremely pressed on hypermasculine men dating them? Do I think they could be happy with somebody who's not as hypermasculine? Do I think they're learning their choices? Yes. Here's my thing. People are gonna like what they like. People are not gonna like what they're not gonna like. So it's not my job to get people to unpack their identity and their stuff. If they want to do the work to unpack stuff and process stuff and figure out what is, why it is, and if they want to open themselves up to stuff, that's their job. But on this video, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on just the tweets in general. If y'all want me to do a video on unpacking masculine preferences and stuff like that, then we can do that. But for me, my thing is this. I believe I am fun, I'm talented, I'm smart, I'm handsome, I'm a great person, I'm a great package. I am the package, period, with postage. So my thing is this. I don't really care if there's a group of people who wouldn't be attracted to me because I'm not whatever their perceived level of masculinity is, that is what they need to date somebody. I'm not losing sleep over that. I don't really care about that as much because I know there are people who are interested in me or who would be interested in me. I don't worry about Black women who are disgusted by bisexual men or who claim that they would never date a bisexual man, because if that's you and that's your prerogative, then we don't have to date. There are plenty of Black women who are accepting of bisexual men. So for me, when it comes to this whole conversation, if you thought this was going to be a video where I was going to sit here and bash and slam people for not being attracted to feminine people, this isn't the video. And my thing is, I'm not going to openly ever accept feminine bashing of Black queer men, and I don't think people should bash Black queer men. I think Black feminine queer men need to get to a place where we're not bothered by tweets. I'm not saying everybody's bothered by these tweets, but I do think there are some people who are truly hurt every time they see these tweets coming up on their timeline. And I get it, because there are times, I mean, it's not often, but there are times when I do feel insecure and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is who I am as a person I am naturally holding me back? Like, if I was more masculine, would it be easier for me to make connections, etc.? But then I snap out of it and I'm like, you are who you are, and like, you as a person are valid, and if somebody doesn't see that, or if people don't see that right now, that doesn't mean you're any less than. I'm gonna be real and say I feel like dating is harder for Black feminine queer men because people praise masculinity and people view masculinity as the ideal. Even when it comes to just being out as Black queer men, not even just talking about dating, the more clockable you are, the more feminine you are, the more of a target is put on your back. Even with 𝑭𝒂𝒕, going back to 𝑭𝒂𝒕, he talked about being someone who played with Barbie dolls, and he had the Spice Girl dolls. 𝑭𝒂𝒕 had a bigger target on his back than the straight acting, straight presenting, hypermasculine people who could blend in with the other boys. And so one of the things I hate is when I see Black hypermasculine and Black straight acting queer men shitting on Black feminine queer men by constantly complaining about how they're so single and how they wish they could find masculine men. Here's the thing about the tweets. There's this undertone in the tweets where it's basically saying they're not complaining that there are no gay men or bi men or queer men to date in their area. They're complaining because there aren't people who are up to their preferences when it comes to masculinity. And you are allowed to feel a way if the people that you want, the people you are attracted to, aren't around. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But I just feel like it's shitty to put yourself in this state of victimhood where you're constantly complaining about not being able to meet someone, but you're also forming these very narrow standards of who is worthy of having your attention. I'm all for you not settling for anything that you don't want in a relationship. I personally have no issues with people being picky when it comes to dating, when it comes to relationships. But my thing is this: if you are going to be uber picky, you can't sit here and be extremely picky and also be upset about being single. 𝑦𝒂𝒕 made a great statement in one of his videos. He states on the same topic, well, if y'all masculine men are so upset about being single, why don't y'all date each other? And that's the funny thing when it comes to these conversations about masculine men. I feel a lot of Black queer masculine men, their standards for masculinity are so contrived and circumstantial that you may be sitting here complaining about being masculine, but one of the guys in your area who's also masculine, looking for a masculine man, he doesn't even think you're masculine because you have dyed hair, you have a nose ring, or you have 2 earrings or something. I feel some Black queer men who are obsessed with the hypermasculinity, I feel they kind of make things harder for themselves. When you make your definition of masculinity so rigid, there are going to be less people who fit it than people who do fit it. I don't have an issue with people wanting something from their partner, but I do have an issue with people wanting to be seen as the victim when they are choosing to exclude other viable candidates. And what do I mean by this? If you are a Black queer man who is trying to be in a long-term relationship, who's serious about finding love, and when you're sitting here swiping through apps, when you're at queer spaces and engaging with queer people, if you are that bothered by the tiniest amount of femininity in a queer man, and then you're also complaining about being single, I think maybe you need to evaluate your preferences. You can be as picky as you want, but don't expect my sympathy. My thing is, I don't care if you're attracted to more masculine men or more feminine men, but I think as Black women, we have to have this front. We have to have this respect and solidarity for each other. In the same way I feel Black men who are attracted to Black women need to have this agreement with Black women where even if you're not attracted to a Black woman, that doesn't mean you're going to sit on her or shade her or make her feel bad or make her feel insecure. One of the things I hate about some Black men is the fact that if they're not attracted to other Black men, they feel the need to shit on them. They feel the need to be shady and hateful and rude to these people. And that's something I've never been cool with. And the thing I think people don't understand is it's not necessarily just about what you're personally attracted to, but it's about the message you're sending. One of the things I said earlier in the video I wanted to reiterate is the fact that these tweets have impacted how I move in my own personal dating life, which I'm trying to unlearn and unpack and process. But you have to realize the impact that your words have on people. As a Black queer man, I shouldn't be worried about meeting people or talking on the phone with people and stuff like that because of how I talk or how I express myself. But because of the way these tweets are, they've made me feel self-conscious about who I am and presenting myself in the world, because I just worry, oh my gosh, am I not masculine enough? Am I going to meet the test? The thing that should be going through my mind is, do I like this person? And some of that is stuff that's directly related to y'all shitting on Black queer men who are more feminine. Because when y'all constantly shit on Black queer men who are more feminine, you're sending this message that we aren't good enough. And well, I have self-esteem while I do have self-confidence. Y'all aren't helping my self-esteem or confidence, or you're not helping the self-esteem and confidence of other queer men, Black queer men who are more feminine, by shaming us, making us feel like there's something wrong with us, and making us feel like we're undesirable. One thing I wanted to bring up is a clip from 𝑭𝒊𝒓𝒔𝒕. In one of her videos, she speaks about how this Black man makes this video where he talks about being disgusted at the thought of dating Black women. And she talks about the indirect effect that can have on young Black girls who are trying to find their identity and build their self-esteem.
And I just thought about how young Black women grow up in a world where they have to navigate messaging like this TikTok. They don't know when they're going to see it, when it's going to pop up, when someone that looks like them is going to feel the need to make some sweeping statement declaring them not good enough. And young Hispanic girls don't grow up with that. I never see, and if that's not true, please let me know in the comments below, but I never see little Latino guys making TikToks about how I don't date Latina, I don't do that, I don't see it enough to where it's something that I expect when I'm on a social media platform.
People can say different hurtful things that just sort of put their internalized colorism and their internalized, misogynoir and their internalized racism. They just put those things on display and they disguise that as a preference. Feel what you want to feel, but also recognize in stating what you're stating that you're contributing to worshiping a group of people who really don't need any more worship. There's nothing wrong with liking something, but the problem becomes when you could possibly cause harm to other people or make other people think like, oh, well, I'm not good enough.
But a lot of times I just don't comment on it. And a lot of times I don't comment on it because it was happening when I was young. And I see it happening now and I'm like, dang. A baby could have run across this. Like a little 13-year-old baby. She starts asking, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with dating a Black woman? And then this whole narrative starts unfolding in her head. This whole perspective of the way that she sees herself, the way that she sees the world. Because one day you might be in a mood to make some content. You might put a video saying something like this out on the internet, making this face. And a baby, a little girl who is just growing up and just starting to see herself might see something like this and might see the disgust on your face and might begin to question her self-worth and might have to ask somebody, why would he say that about me? And then all of a sudden, a complex comes in her mind. And she begins to realize that she's going to have to ask permission to be loved. And she's going to have to navigate every single situation wondering, does he like Black women? Am I okay here and here? And that's hell. And when you state something like this and you do something like this, you are contributing to that.
And in the way dark-skinned Black women can have a struggle with building their self-esteem because they always are seeing Black men shade them and shit on them on social media, I feel it can be very difficult for more feminine and Black for men to build a sense of self-esteem and self-worth when they are constantly seeing people in their own community shitting on them. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Love y'all. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. Like this video if you like this video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the points I made in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, definitely like, comment, subscribe, and share. That way, even if YouTube isn't pushing my content, those who resonate with it are sharing it so it can connect with others who would enjoy it. Those are some easy, free ways to support a pop of culture. If you want to support this show financially, feel free to send a tip to my Cash App or buy me a cup of coffee. Both are linked below. All who donate will be featured in the credits of my long-form commentary and cover videos. There are 2 playlists that are going to pop up, one where you can binge watch my covers and one where you can binge watch my commentary. Enjoy. Bye-bye.